The wind howled through the crumbling walls of the old cottage as Mira sat by the fire, listening to her grandmother's voice, cracked and hushed, as though the words themselves might be swallowed by the night. Outside, the rain lashed against the windows, the dark sky pressing close, as if trying to seep into the very bones of the house. "You should not have asked, Mira," Agnes whispered, her frail hands trembling as they rested on her lap. "There are some stories best left untold." Her eyes, once sharp and full of life, were now clouded with age, yet they held a glimmer of something ancient, something fearful. Mira sat forward, her curiosity sparking against her grandmother's warnings. "But I need to know. Why does the lake claim so many souls? Why does no one dare approach Blackwater Hollow?" The old woman sighed, the weight of her years pressing down on her chest. She had told the story before, but it had always been a warning, not an invitation. Still, Mira's persistence was unyielding. Agnes paused, her lips trembling before she spoke, barely audible over the storm. "Long ago, there was a city that was beautiful beyond measure, with streets lined with gold and towers that reached the heavens. But beauty has a price, child. The people of Eryndor, who called the city home, wanted more. They sought forbidden knowledge, and they found it." Agnes's voice dropped to a whisper, and Mira had to lean in closer. "They summoned something from the depths, something ancient, hungry. The entity rose, consuming everything in its path. The city sank into the lake, taking all its people with it, leaving only the curse behind." Mira's breath caught in her throat. "The curse? What kind of curse?" Agnes looked away, unable to meet her granddaughter's eyes. "It's not the kind you can see. It's the kind that follows you, the kind that twists your mind, pulls you toward the lake, and when you get too close, when you hear the whispers, there is no escape." She paused, her voice cracking. "The city is not dead. It waits, beneath the water." Mira felt a shiver creep up her spine, but her resolve did not waver. "Then I will find it." Agnes clutched the arm of her chair as if trying to hold herself together. "And you'll regret it, child. The lake will claim you, just as it claimed them." Mira couldn't shake the image of her grandmother's words. The warning, the curse, the lake. Every night after their conversation, she found herself standing by the window, staring out into the dark expanse of Blackwater Hollow, hidden beyond the forest's edge. It called to her, though she didn't fully understand why. Her fascination with history had always led her to ancient myths, long-forgotten cities, and untold stories. But Eryndor was different. There was something about it, something that pulled at the edges of her soul. The more she read about it in the town's old archives, the more she knew she had to find it. The legends were incomplete, full of gaps, and Mira couldn't stand the thought of not knowing the truth. She sat in the quiet of her study, the only light coming from the flickering candle on her desk. Papers, maps, and old manuscripts were spread out before her. She pored over them, searching for any clue that could lead her to the fabled city. And then she found it, an ancient map, yellowed and torn at the edges. At first glance, it appeared to be just another local legend, but something about the faded ink called to her. The map depicted Blackwater Hollow, but not as it was now. It showed tunnels beneath the lake's surface, twisting and winding, leading to a marked spot, Eryndor. The coordinates were precise, and beneath the map, a single line of text sent a chill down her spine. "Only the brave may enter, but the cursed shall remain." Mira's heart raced as she traced the markings. She knew the lake was dangerous, but the pull of curiosity was far stronger than fear. She had to go. She had to see it for herself. She couldn't let this mystery fester any longer. The next day, she sought out Alec, her childhood friend. He had always been the cautious one, the one who'd rather stay home than venture into the unknown. She found him in the small pub by the village square, nursing a drink in the dim light. "Alec, you have to come with me," Mira said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of excitement inside her. He looked up from his drink, brow furrowed. "Come with you where?" "To Blackwater Hollow. There's a city beneath the lake, and I'm going to find it." Alec's face paled. "Mira, no, you know the stories. People go there, and they never come back. That place is cursed. I don't believe in curses, she replied, her voice defiant. I'm not afraid. Alec's hand tightened around his glass. He knew Mira better than anyone, and he knew she wouldn't back down. Fine, but I'm coming with you. Someone has to make sure you don't do something stupid. Mira smiled, a little too eagerly. We leave at midnight. The night of their departure arrived. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, the kind that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The moon was hidden behind clouds, casting the world in shadows. Mira and Alec stood by the edge of Blackwater Hollow, their breath visible in the frigid night air, their boat waiting in the still water. Mira, holding the map tightly, scanned the fog-covered lake. There was something suffocating about the place. The darkness seemed to pull at her, as though the land itself was alive, watching them, waiting for them to make the first move. You sure about this? Alec asked, his voice low and edged with concern. His hand gripped the oar tightly, knuckles white against the wood. I mean, it feels wrong, Mira. She ignored the unease in his voice, her eyes fixed on the center of the lake. It's just a lake, Alec. There's nothing to be afraid of. But Alec could feel it, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The lake had always been a place of mystery, a dark, foreboding entity in itself. The fog that rolled off the water seemed unnatural, curling and twisting in ways that didn't make sense, like something malevolent was controlling it. As they rode deeper into the lake, the silence grew louder. The usual sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the call of night creatures, were eerily absent. It was as though the very air around them was holding its breath. Mira, oblivious to the growing tension, kept her eyes locked on the distant point marked on the map. It's just ahead. We're close. The water beneath them was so black that it felt like they were rowing through oil. The oars sliced through the surface with a muffled splash, but no ripples followed, as though the water was swallowing any trace of their presence. Suddenly, the boat lurched. Alec's grip slipped on the oar, and he cursed under his breath. He peered over the side, eyes wide with dread. Mira, did you feel that? She nodded, her face pale but determined. It's fine, just the current. We're almost there. But Alec wasn't convinced. The water seemed to pull them closer, dragging them toward the center of the lake, where the map indicated something. Something that neither of them fully understood. A deep, ancient pull, like the lake itself had come alive, aware of their intrusion. Ahead of them, the fog began to thicken. The air grew colder and the temperature dropped sharply, biting into their skin. Alec shivered despite himself, but Mira pressed on. She didn't want to acknowledge the creeping unease that had started to take root in her chest. Then, as they reached the center of the lake, something in the water shifted. Beneath the surface, the outline of something massive loomed. The faintest glimmer of stone. A structure? The entrance? They stopped rowing, their boat drifting slowly toward the dark mass that lay hidden beneath the water. The fog parted slightly, revealing an archway, ancient and covered in moss, its stone face cracked with age. It was exactly as the map had described. Mira's heart raced with excitement, her pulse pounding in her ears. This was it, the entrance to Eryndor. But as they drifted closer, the temperature dropped even further. The air felt thick, suffocating. Alec swallowed hard, the fear rising in his throat. This isn't right, Mira, he muttered. We should go back. But Mira was already reaching for the diving equipment. We've come this far. We're going in. The boat drifted silently toward the darkened entrance, and Mira was the first to move, her gaze locked on the ancient archway that loomed ahead. Its stone surface, slick with algae and time, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as though something waited on the other side. The heavy fog wrapped around them like a living thing, suffocating the air. Alec hesitated, his fingers twitching nervously around the oar. Mira, this is madness. We can't just dive into some ancient, cursed city. His voice wavered, but Mira was already undoing the straps of her gear, determined. We came for answers, Alec, she said, her voice sharp, dismissing the unease that had begun to take root in her. There's nothing here but stone and water. It's just an old legend. We'll find the truth. Alec's mouth went dry, but he didn't argue further. He knew Mira well enough to know she wouldn't back down once she'd set her mind to something. With a resigned sigh, he began putting on his own gear, the weight of the situation sinking in with every strap he tightened. Once they were both ready, they dove into the cold, black water. The surface was freezing, and the lake seemed to swallow them whole as they descended into the depths. The water was so dense with darkness that even with their diving lights, it felt as if they were swimming through ink. Their movements felt sluggish, as though the water itself resisted them, pulling them toward something deeper, darker. As they neared the archway, the current grew stronger, pulling them downward. Alec fought against it, panic creeping up his chest, but Mira was undeterred, her eyes focused on the glowing outline of the arch. Her heart raced as she swam closer, her breaths coming in sharp gasps as the pressure of the water seemed to increase. Then, with a sudden lurch, they passed through the arch and into a vast underground cavern. The city of Eryndor lay before them, an ancient, crumbling metropolis frozen in time. Buildings rose from the lake floor, their stone walls covered in layers of moss and vine. Streets lay empty and silent, a forgotten ghost town beneath the surface. The structures, though ruined, still held the grandeur of a civilization long past. Tall towers, broken statues, and remnants of intricate carvings decorated the decaying cityscape. Mira's heart fluttered in awe and terror. They had found it, the lost city of Eryndor. They swam further into the city, their lights illuminating the wreckage of what once was. The faint glow of the torches they carried reflected off the wet stone, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. They passed what appeared to be an abandoned market square, now submerged in murky water, the remnants of stalls and broken stone tables barely visible under the surface. As Mira swam past, something caught her eye, a stone tablet half buried in the silt, its surface engraved with strange symbols. She reached out to touch it, but Alec grabbed her arm, his grip tight with warning. "Don't," he hissed, his voice barely audible through the diving gear. "This place, it's wrong. It's like it's alive." But Mira wasn't listening. She pulled free of his grasp, her fingers brushing the stone, the coldness of it sending a jolt through her spine. The moment her skin made contact, the water around them seemed to ripple with a force of its own. A deep, guttural rumble echoed from somewhere far beneath the city, the sound reverberating through the stone like the growl of some sleeping beast. Mira's heart skipped a beat as she looked around, her eyes wide with fear. Alec's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to go. Now!" But Mira's attention was fixed on the stone tablet, which had begun to glow faintly, as if it were alive. The ancient symbols etched into it seemed to shift and change, twisting into new shapes that Mira couldn't understand. She had uncovered something important, but it felt wrong, dangerous. The water grew colder, and the rumbling grew louder. Something deep within the city was waking. Mira's fingers trembled against the stone tablet, her mind racing to understand the shifting symbols before her. The soft glow of the tablet pulsed faintly, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. Beneath the water's surface, the shadows seemed to move, stretching out toward them like dark tendrils. Alec swam closer, his face pale beneath his diving mask. His voice was frantic, the urgency clear, even through the muffling of the water. "Mira, we need to get out of here. Something's wrong. This place—" He paused, looking around, eyes wide with growing horror. "It's not just ruins. It's alive." The words hung in the water like a chilling echo. Mira reluctantly tore her hand from the stone tablet and turned toward Alec. The city around them was far more unsettling than she'd first realized. The buildings, though magnificent, were not simply ancient. They were decaying, yet there was an unnatural vitality about them. The stone seemed to shift and groan as if protesting their presence. The deeper they swam into the city, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was thick with the weight of history, and the water felt as though it were pressing in on them, suffocating them with every stroke. The street signs that jutted from the water were worn and covered with barnacles, but some of the markings still seemed vaguely familiar to Mira. Her heart pounded as she swam closer to a large structure in the center of the city, a cathedral, its broken spires towering into the depths like skeletal fingers reaching for the surface. It was here, in the shadow of this ancient structure, that Mira felt a presence, something intangible but undeniable. It was as though the city itself was watching them, its decayed heart beating slowly, rhythmically. The water around them shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble ever so slightly, as if the city was alive, waking from a long, cursed slumber. Alec grasped her arm, his eyes frantic. "We should leave now. Whatever this place is, it's cursed. I can feel it." But Mira refused to back down. Her curiosity was insatiable, and the answers she sought were close. So close. She motioned for Alec to follow her as she swam toward the cathedral's entrance. The heavy door cracked open just enough to reveal a glimpse of what lay beyond. The interior of the cathedral was far worse than she could have ever imagined. Inside, the water was murky, swirling with the remnants of ancient rituals, symbols carved into the stone floor, the altar covered with a strange, thick layer of what could only be described as dried blood. The air was thick with a pungent, rotten stench, a scent that seemed to cling to the walls and seep into their very skin. As Mira swam deeper into the cathedral, her eyes caught sight of something that made her stomach churn. A figure, sitting at the altar, frozen in time, its skeletal form slumped forward. The thing was not human, nor was it a simple statue. It was a figure, a king, perhaps, but its face had long since rotted away, leaving only an empty socket where eyes once were. Yet as Mira approached, she could feel it, its presence, its awareness. The air seemed to grow colder still, and the whispers began, soft, barely audible at first, but they grew louder, filling her mind, drowning out everything else. "Leave, before it wakes. Leave before it takes you." Mira shuddered, but the pull of the city, of the knowledge buried beneath it, was too strong to resist. She swam toward the altar, her heart hammering in her chest. She had to know, had to uncover the truth no matter the cost. The whispers grew louder, and with them a deep, unsettling hum reverberated through the cathedral. The very stones of the structure seemed to tremble as if some ancient power was stirring beneath them. Mira could feel it, an immense, crushing presence rising from the depths of the city, like a beast waking from an age-long slumber. Alec was visibly shaking, his eyes darting around in terror. "Mira, we need to go now. This isn't just a city, it's a tomb, and it's waking up. Don't you feel it?" His voice was strained, breaking under the weight of the fear that pressed in around them. But Mira could not pull herself away. Her eyes locked on the skeletal figure at the altar, and the whispers, like 1,000 voices scraping against her mind, urged her forward. She had to understand what had happened here, why this city had sunk into the lake, why it had been cursed. As she swam closer to the altar, the water around her seemed to grow colder. Her skin prickled, and her breath came in shallow gasps, fogging up her mask. The air was thick with the scent of rot and decay, but beneath it, something darker, something alive, hung in the water. The longer she lingered, the more the oppressive weight of the city pressed down on her. She reached out a trembling hand toward the altar, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. The moment her skin made contact, a violent tremor shook the entire structure. The water around her rippled and swirled, dark tendrils forming beneath the surface, reaching out toward them. "Mira, get out!" Alec screamed, his voice frantic as he grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away. But it was too late. A deafening roar erupted from the depths of the city, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the stone, shaking the very foundations of Eryndor. The skeletal figure at the altar began to move, its bones creaking and grinding against each other as it slowly lifted its head. Its empty eye sockets seemed to gaze directly at Mira, and an overwhelming sense of dread filled her chest. Then something ancient and horrifying stirred beneath the water. A dark shape, a shadow of unimaginable size, shifted just out of sight, moving through the depths with a malevolent intelligence. It was as if the very city had been waiting for their intrusion, waiting for someone to awaken it. Alec, now completely panicked, tugged on Mira's arm again, his voice barely audible over the growing noise of the awakening city. "Mira, we have to leave now. This place is alive. The curse, it's real." But Mira could not tear her eyes away from the altar. The figure, now fully animated, rose from its seat, its skeletal hands reaching toward her. The whispers grew louder, clawing at her mind, urging her to stay, to embrace the darkness that had been buried beneath the lake for centuries. Suddenly, the water around them churned violently. The ground shook, and the city seemed to groan in agony. The dark shape beneath the water had risen, and Mira could see it now. A massive, shadowy form with glowing eyes, its twisted limbs moving unnaturally, like the limbs of some ancient, monstrous god. It was the entity that had cursed the city, the creature that had been awakened by her touch. Alec grabbed her, yanking her back, but the creature was too strong. It surged forward, a massive, dark wave of energy rising from the depths, swallowing the water around them. Mira's vision blurred as the water grew thicker, colder, and more suffocating. The whispers turned into screams, agonizing, tortured voices that echoed through the cathedral, pleading for release, for peace that would never come. Mira struggled against Alec's grip, her body fighting to break free of the overwhelming pull of the dark entity. But in that moment, as the dark force surrounded them, Mira realized the truth. The city was not just a place, it was a prison, a tomb for something ancient and malevolent. The curse had never been just about the city. It had been about the creature that had been bound beneath it, locked away in the depths of Blackwater Hollow. And now, it was free. The water around them became like a living thing, swirling and pulsing with a force that seemed to have a mind of its own. Alec's frantic movements grew slower, his body pulled in all directions by an unseen power. The cold, oppressive energy of the city pressed against them from all sides. Mira's heart hammered in her chest, and her breath came in ragged gasps, but no amount of desperation could ease the suffocating weight of the presence now surrounding them. The dark creature, once just a shadow beneath the surface, now revealed itself in full. Its massive form towered over the ruins, its tentacle-like limbs swirling through the water, its glowing eyes scanning the ruins, and its gaping mouth opening in a grotesque display of hunger. It was a thing older than time itself, something that should never have been allowed to awaken. Alec's voice cracked with fear. "Mira, we have to leave. It's going to—" But his words were drowned out by a low, guttural rumble that reverberated from deep within the creature, vibrating through the water and into their very bones. The creature's eyes fixed on Mira, and in that moment, a flood of images rushed into her mind, flashes of its past, of Eryndor before the curse had fallen upon it. The city, once thriving and full of life, had been brought to ruin by this very creature, which had been worshipped as a god. The people had believed in its power, had revered it, until it had grown too strong, until it demanded too much. It had been sealed beneath the lake, bound and forgotten, but the ritual that had kept it imprisoned had begun to fail over time. Mira's body trembled with the weight of the knowledge. She could feel the creature's mind pressing into hers, its hunger, its rage, its longing for freedom. The whispers had been right. The city was alive, and it had been waiting. "We have to go!" Alec screamed again, but Mira could no longer hear him. The creature's thoughts had drowned out everything else. The city itself seemed to be closing in on them, the shadows twisting and writhing as if in response to the creature's awakening. Mira's mind slipped further into madness, her thoughts disjointed and fractured, as the creature's ancient presence filled every corner of her mind. She could see flashes of the city's last moments, the destruction, the screams of the inhabitants as they had been swallowed by the creature's hunger. Their bones, their souls, trapped here in the water, cursed to serve the thing that had once been their god. Alec's face was blurred in her vision, his voice distant and hollow. Mira, we're not alone anymore. It's inside us. She turned toward him, her hands shaking, but her mind was no longer fully her own. The creature's power had infected her thoughts, feeding off her fear, pulling her deeper into the dark abyss that now consumed everything around them. The whispers returned, louder than ever, like a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from every direction. Join us! Join us! Become one with us! The voices of the long dead, the forgotten souls of Eryndor cried out, their tormented wails twisting into something darker, something monstrous. Mira felt herself being pulled, her limbs numb, as if the water itself were dragging her down into the depths. Alec's terrified cries became muffled, fading as she descended into the darkness. The creature's influence on her mind was undeniable. She could feel its presence taking root within her, feeding on her fear, turning her into something less than human, a vessel for its dark power. But she didn't want to become like them. She didn't want to be another soul trapped beneath the lake, forever bound to the curse of Eryndor. She had to fight, had to find a way to escape before it was too late. The creature, sensing her resistance, roared in fury, its massive body thrashing violently through the water. The walls of the cathedral cracked and crumbled, the ruins collapsing as the lake itself seemed to rage against the bonds that had held it in place for so long. Mira fought with every ounce of strength she had left, her body screaming in protest as she tried to break free of the creature's grip. Alec's voice pierced through the chaos, but it was distant, far away. She couldn't tell if he was still there, if he had already succumbed to the darkness. With one final, desperate push, Mira broke free from the water's grasp, her body shooting toward the surface like a lifeline. But as she breached the surface, gasping for air, a terrifying realization hit her. The creature's influence was still with her, seeping into her very soul. The city, the creature, it had won. Mira gasped for breath as she broke the surface of the water, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her heart pounded in her chest, but the cold air tasted like freedom. A brief, fleeting moment of relief. The heavy weight of the creature's influence seemed to lift for a moment, as if the dark force had loosened its grip on her mind. But she knew, deep down, it was only temporary. The creature's power had burrowed deep into her soul, and she could feel it stirring, waiting to claim her once again. Alec's figure appeared beside her, his face drawn with terror. He was gasping for air, too, his movements frantic as he clung to the edge of the boat. "Mira!" he cried, reaching out to her with trembling hands. "We have to leave. We're not safe here. It's too late." Mira didn't answer. She simply stared at the water, her eyes wide, her mind racing. The city lay beneath them, a crumbling, cursed shadow in the depths of the lake. But the creature was no longer confined to its prison. It was free, and it would not stop until it had consumed everything in its path, including her. "Mira, we need to go now!" Alec's voice was panicked, but Mira couldn't move. She was paralyzed, her body unwilling to leave, her thoughts consumed by the whispering voices from the depths. "Join us. Become one with us." She could still hear the voices, soft at first, like a distant murmur in the back of her mind, but growing louder with each passing second. The creature was calling to her, beckoning her back into the abyss. Its hunger was insatiable, and now that it had tasted freedom, it would not rest until it had claimed her, body and soul. "Mira, please! We have to get out of here before it's too late!" Alec shouted again, his hands grabbing her shoulders and shaking her. The touch broke through the fog in her mind, and for a moment, Mira remembered who she was. She remembered the reason they had come here, the answers, the discovery of the lost city, the truth hidden beneath the lake. But now, the truth seemed irrelevant. The creature, the city, it was all a nightmare, a hellish dream that would never end. With great effort, Mira pulled herself away from the edge of the boat, her limbs shaking with fear and exhaustion. She could still feel the pull of the city, its dark power calling to her, but she forced herself to look away. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice hollow. Alec didn't argue. He grabbed the oars, his hands shaking as he began to row with frantic energy. The boat surged forward, slicing through the dark, still waters. The sound of the oars creaking against the boat was the only noise in the oppressive silence that surrounded them. The city was slowly sinking beneath the surface, vanishing into the depths, but the sense of dread, the feeling that something was still watching them, remained. Mira turned her head, her eyes scanning the dark waters, expecting to see the creature's glowing eyes or feel its presence creeping toward them. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of the lake, its surface still and unbroken. They rowed for what felt like hours, the boat cutting through the fog, the air thick with tension. But as they neared the shore, the whispers returned, louder now, echoing through Mira's mind. "It's not over. You cannot escape. You belong to us." She gripped the sides of the boat, her nails digging into the wood, as a terrible realization settled over her. She had been marked. The creature's influence had already taken root in her, and no matter how far she ran, it would follow. It would never let her go. Alec's frantic rowing slowed as they neared the shore. He looked at her, his face pale, his eyes wild with fear. "Mira, are you all right?" Mira didn't respond. She simply stared ahead, her mind consumed with the relentless whispers that clawed at her consciousness. She could feel the creature, lurking just beneath the surface, its hunger never satisfied, its presence always there, waiting to pull her back into the depths. As the boat touched the shore, Mira felt a chill wash over her, an icy breath on the back of her neck. The fog clung to the air like a blanket, smothering everything in its path. Alec climbed out of the boat, pulling her along with him, but Mira's feet were heavy, her body unwilling to leave. She could still hear it, the low, guttural hum of the creature beneath the water, growing louder, more insistent. Suddenly, there was a sharp, deafening crack from the water. Mira spun around, her heart lurching in her chest. A massive, dark shape erupted from the lake, its enormous limbs reaching for the sky as it roared in fury. The lake churned with a violent energy, the surface splintering as the creature's form surged forward, its eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. "Mira!" Alec screamed, pulling her away, but it was too late. The creature was upon them, its massive form rising out of the water, blotting out the sky. And as Mira looked into its glowing eyes, she realized the terrifying truth. No matter how far they ran, no matter how desperately they tried to escape, they were already lost. The curse had claimed them. The city, the creature, the whispers. They had all been waiting for this moment. Mira and Alec would never leave Blackwater Hollow. They would never escape the creature's dark, twisted embrace. The creature's massive form loomed above them, casting a long, grotesque shadow over the shore as the water around them began to boil and churn. Mira could feel the darkness seeping into her very soul, a weight so heavy that it threatened to crush her spirit. The whispers were deafening now, their cold, mocking tones clawing at her mind, drowning out everything else. "You cannot escape. You are part of us now." Alec screamed, trying to pull Mira away from the shore, his legs trembling beneath him as he stumbled backward. But the creature's influence had already taken root in both of them. The air felt thick and oppressive, as if the very atmosphere was alive with malevolence. Mira could see it now, the full extent of the curse. Eryndor had once been a thriving city, full of life and prosperity, but greed and worship of this monstrous entity had led to its downfall. The creature, a god to the people of Eryndor, had demanded more than they could give. Its power grew, its hunger grew, until the city's rulers, desperate to save their people, had resorted to the ancient ritual that bound it beneath the lake. But that ritual had failed, as all things eventually do. The creature had waited, biding its time, until the day it could reclaim what was rightfully its. And now that day had come. The ground beneath them trembled as the creature moved, its tendrils writhing like snakes in the water. Its glowing eyes focused on them, its malevolent gaze like a burning brand searing into their souls. "Mira," Alec whispered, his voice barely audible over the low, guttural growl of the creature. "We're too late. We can't stop it." Tears welled up in Mira's eyes, But they were not just tears of fear. They were tears of sorrow for all the souls who had been trapped here, who had given themselves to this dark god in the hope of salvation. She felt their pain, their torment, their endless longing for release. But the creature offered no mercy. With a sound like 1,000 souls screaming in unison, the creature lunged forward, its monstrous form crashing toward them. The world around Mira blurred, time slowing as the beast's tendrils wrapped around them, pulling them toward its dark, gaping maw. Mira's vision swam, her body weightless as the creature's grip tightened. She could feel its cold, clammy skin pressing against her, its dark essence seeping into her very being. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she felt no fear, not anymore. The creature had claimed her, and she had surrendered to it. The water rushed around her, dragging her down deeper and deeper into the dark abyss. The last thing she saw before the darkness overtook her was Alec's terrified face, his eyes wide with hopelessness, as he too was consumed by the creature. And then there was nothing. The creature's roar echoed through the lake, a triumphant sound that filled the entire valley. The city of Eryndor, once a magnificent and thriving place, had finally met its end. Its secrets were no longer hidden beneath the water. They had been consumed, destroyed by the very force they had worshipped. The lake, once a tranquil and peaceful body of water, had become a tomb, a place where the dark god now ruled, its hunger sated for a time, its thirst for power quenched. But the whispers, the tortured voices of those who had given their souls to the creature, would never stop. They would echo through the depths of the lake for all eternity, a reminder of the price paid for the city's arrogance. No one would remember Eryndor except for the whispers. No one would speak its name. And those who ventured too close to Blackwater Hollow would hear its call, a dark and twisted invitation to join the creature in its eternal prison. The end of Eryndor had come, but its legacy, the darkness, the hunger, and the curse, would remain forever,